told me, "Your bed skills have gotten much better. Did you have any training?" I got so shocked. Hey Reddit, I never thought I'd actually ever find myself posting on here, but I need to get this off my chest. I've been a lurker for years on this platform, reading other people's stories, but never in a million years did I think I'd be the one writing one of my own. But I guess life has a funny way of throwing curveballs when you least expect it. This story might be long and I might ramble a bit, but I hope you stick with me till the end. So, a bit of background. I've been married to my husband Tom for 5 years. My name is Anna. I am 29 and Tom is 30. We met in college and hit it off immediately. He was charming, funny, and incredibly supportive. We got married right after graduation and we've been building our life together ever since. Tom has always been my rock, the kind of person who would go out of his way to make me happy. For the most part, our relationship was great. Like any relationship, we've had our ups and downs, but we always found a way to get through them. That was until recently. Tom is a surgeon and he's really good at it, so he's always busy. He's also the head of his department at the hospital, so his workload is quite heavy. We had also been suffering a bit in the intimacy part of our life. Tom just didn't do it the way I liked. He was more of a soft person in that area and was quite vanilla. I, on the other hand, liked the extremes, but that wasn't something Tom was really interested in. So that meant our intimacy kind of dwindled. I worked at an art gallery, and while the pay wasn't much, it was a flexible job that I loved. Art has always been a passion of mine, and working at the gallery allowed me to stay connected to that world and keep myself a little busy. The idea of a traditional 9-to-5 job always felt constricting to me. And since Tom made enough to cover our bills and then some, I never really felt the need to seek out a more conventional job. The flexibility of my gallery job was one of its best features because it allowed me to maintain a schedule that suited me. Tom, on the other hand, had an incredibly demanding job. As a surgeon and the head of his department, he carried a huge weight on his shoulders. His schedule was always packed with surgeries, administrative responsibilities, and emergencies that often kept him at the hospital late into the night. This meant he was always busy, and the stress of his responsibilities were taking a toll on him. It was like I was losing him to his job. I was starting to get lonely. In the first 2 years of our marriage, Tom's dedication to his job didn't bother me much. I admired his commitment and felt proud to be married to someone who was making such a significant impact in his field. However, as time went on, his absence started to weigh on me. Our conversations became more infrequent, and when we did talk, it centered around his work. The intimacy in our relationship began to suffer even more, and I felt increasingly lonely. I tried to stay busy with my work at the gallery, but it wasn't enough to fill the void. I wanted more companionship and emotional support than Tom could provide. The more he climbed the professional ladder, the more I felt like we were growing apart. The distance between us wasn't just physical, it was emotional too. I didn't know how to talk to him about it without hurting his feelings, so I kept my dissatisfaction to myself, hoping things would get better on their own. But they didn't. The more time Tom spent at work, the more disconnected I felt. It seemed like every conversation we had was either about his job or something mundane. The spark that once existed between us was fading, and I didn't know how to reignite it. I felt neglected and unappreciated, even though I knew Tom was doing his best to provide for us and excel in his career. On the few times that Tom was actually free and we managed to spend the day or even just a few hours together, I tried to make the most of it. I cherished those rare moments when we could reconnect, even if just for a little while. However, when it came to being intimate, things were far from ideal. Tom, bless his heart, was always gentle and considerate, but I had a preference for things to be a bit more intense and rough. It wasn't something I brought up lightly, but after a while, the difference in our desires started to bother me more and more. I had tried talking to Tom about it, gently suggesting that we could spice things up a bit. I even mentioned that it might be fun to experiment or attend a swingers party, just to keep things exciting. But Tom wasn't interested. He was content with our intimate life as it was and didn't see the need to change anything. His reluctance wasn't out of disregard for my feelings. It was just that he genuinely didn't share the same level of curiosity in that aspect of our relationship. I remember one particular evening when we had both finally managed to be at home together without any pressing engagements or late-night surgeries hanging over us. We had a nice dinner, watched a movie, and eventually made our way to the bedroom. We started having sex, and I tried to push him to be a bit rougher. But despite my best efforts, it always felt like I was holding back, and so was he. It was frustrating, to say the least. Tom was patient and kind, always asking if I was okay, if I was comfortable. And while I appreciated his concern, it was frustrating. For Tom, it seemed like everything was fine, but for me, it was just a reminder of the growing disconnect between us. I felt like I had exhausted all options. I had tried starting conversations, suggesting new things, and even dropping hints here and there. But nothing seemed to work. It felt like we were stuck in a rut, and every attempt to break out of it only made the walls feel more confining. My frustration grew, and so did my sense of isolation. I started to feel like my needs and desires didn't matter, like I was being unreasonable for wanting more. It was frustrating, really. I could barely get any free time with my husband because he was always so busy with work. And then when I finally did get some free time with him, the intimacy just wasn't what I wanted. Tom was always so gentle and considerate. It felt like we were on completely different pages when it came to our intimate life. Every attempt I made to spice things up seemed to fall flat, and I felt even more isolated and misunderstood. That was when I met Ronald. He was the newest addition to the art gallery where I worked. Ronald was charismatic and had a natural charm that drew people to him. He was passionate about art, and we quickly bonded over our shared interests. At first, it was just nice to have someone to talk to, someone who understood and appreciated the same things I did. Our conversations flowed effortlessly, and I found myself looking forward to seeing him at work every day. Ronald had a way of making me feel seen and heard, something I had been missing in my relationship with Tom. He would listen intently to my stories, laugh at my jokes, and share his own experiences with a level of excitement that was infectious. It was refreshing to have someone who was genuinely interested in me and my thoughts. Our connection grew stronger with each passing day, and it wasn't long before I started to develop feelings for him. Despite my growing attraction and feelings for Ronald, I didn't want to mess up my marriage at first because I still loved my husband. We had been together for a long time, and I didn't want to throw that away. The intimacy might not have been what I wanted, and he was very busy, but it really wasn't his fault. I still loved him, so I tried to ignore my feelings. Tom and I had built a life together. We had been through so much together, and there was a deep bond that I couldn't easily disregard. I knew Tom was working hard for us, and I appreciated that a lot. His long hours and the late nights were all part of his passion for his job, and I respected that. But it was getting increasingly difficult to reconcile my love for him with the loneliness and unmet needs I was feeling. I told myself that what I felt for Ronald was just a crush, something that would pass with time. I tried to distance myself from him. I focused on my work and hobbies, anything to keep my mind off the growing attraction. I reminded myself of the vows I had made to Tom and the life we had built together. I thought about all the good times we had shared, the laughter, the support, the love. I didn't want to run that for a little infatuation. There were moments when I felt guilty even talking to Ronald. Every time he smiled at me or made a joke, I felt a pang of guilt. I knew I was treading dangerous ground, and I didn't want to betray Tom's trust. I tried to remind myself that what I had with Tom was real and solid, something worth fighting for. But no matter how hard I tried, the feelings for Ronald kept creeping back in. I started avoiding Ronald whenever I could. I kept our interactions strictly professional. I limited our conversations and avoided situations where we might be alone together. I thought that if I could just create some distance, the feelings would eventually fade. I tried to focus on Tom. I made an effort to spend more quality time with him and to reconnect on a deeper level. But no matter how hard I tried, the gap between us seemed to widen. One evening, Tom and I went out for dinner, which was rare given how busy he always was. We talked about his work, my job at the gallery, and our future plans. But even as we sat there eating, I felt disconnected. I wanted to tell him how I was feeling, but I was afraid of adding more stress to his already busy life. So I kept my thoughts to myself, put on a smile, and pretended everything was fine. That night, when we were in bed, I tried to be intimate, hoping to bring back some spark between us. But it always felt forced, like we were just going through the motions without really connecting. I missed the feeling of being truly wanted. No matter how much I tried to ignore it, I couldn't help but compare our sex to the fantasies I had about Ronald. The more I tried to push my feelings for Ronald away, the stronger they seemed to get. It was like trying to hold back a flood with a dam full of cracks. Every time I saw him or talked to him, it felt like another crack was forming. I started to dread going to work because I knew I'd see him, and I didn't trust myself to keep my emotions in check. I confided in a close friend about my struggles, hoping for some advice. She listened as I poured out my heart, shared my frustrations about my marriage and my growing feelings for Ronald. She advised me to talk to Tom, to be honest about how I was feeling, and to try and work things out together. But I was scared. I didn't want to hurt Tom, and I didn't want to admit that I had feelings for someone else. So I kept my emotions bottled up. I tried to balance my love for Tom and my attraction to Ronald. It was a constant struggle, and the weight of it was becoming too much to handle. I knew something had to change, but I didn't know what or how. The more I tried to ignore my feelings, the more they grew stronger. Eventually, the inevitable happened. Despite my best efforts to stay true to my marriage, the pull towards Ronald became too strong to resist. It all happened slowly, but once I crossed that line, there was no turning back. In a last-ditch effort to save things, I suggested a threesome to my husband, but he immediately shut it down. He was strictly monogamous and believed in the sanctity of marriage and our vows and didn't ever want to go that route. That was it for me. One evening after work, Ronald and I decided to go out for drinks. We headed to the bar, started drinking, and we started talking. I mentioned how my husband would probably not be home from work, and so it would be just me at home. Ronald suggested that I head over to his house before my husband came home so I wouldn't be lonely at home. I should have said no, but I didn't. I went over there, and I'm sure you already know what happened. Ronald could cook, so he made food for us to eat. After we were done eating, I can't even explain how it happened. It just happened. We started kissing, and then we moved on to his bedroom. After we were done having sex, we went again, and it was honestly perfect. Ronald was everything my husband was not. He was perfect at it, and I realized how much I had been missing in a long while. I expected to feel regret, but I didn't. I felt nothing. That evening was a turning point for me. It was the first time in a long while that I felt truly alive and connected with someone on a physical level. Ronald was attentive and passionate, qualities I had been longing for in my marriage. I felt wanted and desired. I knew what I had done was wrong. I had betrayed my husband and our marriage vows. But at the same time, I felt free, like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. For so long, I had suppressed my desires and needs, convincing myself that they were unimportant compared to my commitment to Tom. But in that moment with Ronald, I realized just how much I had been neglecting my own happiness. We talked for a while, shared stories, and laughed about silly things. Ronald was easy to talk to, and for once I didn't feel like I had to put on a facade. I could be myself without fear of judgment or disappointment. It was refreshing, and it made me question everything I thought I knew about love and relationships. Every time I saw Tom, I felt a pang of guilt, but it was quickly overshadowed by the excitement of my affair with Ronald. I started to find reasons to see him more often, whether it was grabbing lunch together or working late at the gallery. The more we were intimate, the more my feelings for him grew. Tom, ever the dedicated husband, remained oblivious to the changes in my behavior. He was caught up in his work, and I took advantage of his busyness to pursue my affair with Ronald. As time went on, the more time I spent with Ronald and the deeper our affair grew, the more I resented my husband. Every moment with Ronald just highlighted everything I felt was missing in my marriage, and the contrast was unbearable. I resented Tom for so many things. I resented him for not noticing how unhappy and discontent I was, for being so absorbed in his work that he didn't see the cracks forming in our relationship. I resented him for shutting down my suggestion of a threesome or an open relationship. If he had been open to the idea, I wouldn't have felt the need to cheat. I could have continued my relationship with Ronald openly and without guilt. Instead, I was forced to hide everything. Every time Tom came home late from work looking exhausted and distracted, my resentment grew. I felt like I was competing with his job for his attention, and I was always coming in second. I understood that his work was important, but I needed to feel important too. I needed to feel valued and loved, and I wasn't getting that from him. Our conversations became more strained and superficial. We talked about mundane things, his work, errands, the weather, but never about us, about our feelings, about the growing distance between us. I wanted to scream at him, to force him to see how unhappy I was, but I was too scared of what that might lead to. What if he blamed me? What if he didn't care? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that our problems had started long before Ronald entered the picture. I had been feeling neglected and unfulfilled for a long time, but I had convinced myself that it was normal, that it was just a phase. But it wasn't a phase, it was our reality, and it wasn't changing. Ronald, on the other hand, made me feel alive. He noticed me, he cared about my feelings, and he made me feel desired. I felt a spark with him that I hadn't felt with Tom in years. With Ronald, I could be myself without fear of judgment or rejection. It was amazing, and it made me question everything I thought I knew about love and marriage. I started to fantasize about a different life, a life where I could be with Ronald openly and without guilt. I imagined a life where I didn't have to hide my feelings or sneak around. I imagined a life where I felt loved and appreciated every day. But those were just fantasies. The reality was much more complicated. Tom's blindness to my unhappiness only fueled my resentment. How could he not see that I was miserable? How could he not notice the signs? I felt like I was screaming for help, but he was too wrapped up in his own world to hear me. It was infuriating, and it made me feel even more alone. I began to distance myself from Tom emotionally. I stopped trying to connect with him, stopped trying to fix our relationship. I put all my energy into my affair with Ronald, seeking comfort and validation from him instead. It was a dangerous path, but I couldn't stop myself. The more I pulled away from Tom, the closer I got to Ronald. I knew I was making things worse, but I didn't care. I was tired of feeling unloved and unappreciated. I was tired of pretending everything was okay when it wasn't. I wanted to feel something, anything, and Ronald gave me that. He made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. Looking back, I realized that I was running away from my problems instead of facing them. I was using Ronald as an escape, a way to avoid dealing with the issues in my marriage. But at the time, it felt like the only way to survive. I was drowning in my unhappiness, and Ronald was my lifeline. Eventually, my resentment turned into anger. I was angry at Tom for failing me, for not being the husband I needed him to be. I was angry at myself for letting things get so bad, for not speaking up sooner. And I was angry at the situation, at the impossible choices I felt I had to make. The more I resented Tom, the more I clung to Ronald. I guess Tom eventually noticed how distant things had gotten between us. He saw the growing gap and started to overcompensate to fix things. And honestly, I was excited. I loved the happiness Ronald brought into my life, the way he made me feel alive and satisfied. But deep down, I still loved my husband, and I was thrilled that he wanted to work on our marriage. Tom started planning dates and making more time for us. He cut back on his work hours and made a real effort to be home more. It felt like he was finally seeing me and acknowledging the problems we'd been ignoring for so long. He apologized for how things had been and said he wanted to get back to the way things used to be, back to normal. Hearing that made me feel a mix of emotions. On one hand, I was overjoyed because this was what I had been wanting, for Tom to see me, understand my needs, and make our relationship a priority. But on the other hand, I was guilty because I had been cheating, and despite my efforts to keep it hidden, I knew I was living a lie. But in that moment, I chose to focus on the positive. I embraced Tom's new efforts and threw myself into rebuilding our relationship. We went on romantic dates, enjoyed quiet evenings at home, and had long talks about our future. It felt like we were rediscovering each other and finding the spark that had brought us together in the first place. Tom's efforts were genuine, and it was clear he was trying his best. He was attentive, affectionate, and more present than he had been in a while. I felt seen and valued, and it made me hopeful that we could truly fix what was broken between us. Yet despite all the positive changes, Ronald was still a part of my life, and I couldn't bring myself to end things with him. The more Tom tried to repair our marriage, the more confused I felt. I wanted to be honest with Tom, to come clean about everything, but the fear of losing him was paralyzing. What if he couldn't forgive me? What if all his efforts to save our marriage were wasted? The thought of hurting him and shattering his trust was unbearable. So I continued to live a double life, hoping that somehow things would work themselves out. I poured my energy into making things work with Tom while still loving the sex that Ronald provided. Tom and I started having sex again. This was before everything fell apart. I remember that day so clearly because in hindsight, it was the beginning of the end. I had been so naive. I had no idea that I was being investigated. I thought Tom didn't suspect a thing. I thought I was managing my double life perfectly. When Tom and I resumed our sex life, it was better than ever. Having sex with Ronald had taught me a lot of things, and I had honed my skills. I realized that the problem had always been me, not Tom. Now that I had improved my skills, our intimacy was much more enjoyable, and we both enjoyed it. After we were done that night, just before we went to sleep, Tom made an interesting comment. He said my skills had improved and jokingly asked if I had been getting any practice during the period when we were so distant and not really talking. I was shocked. It sounded like a harmless joke, but it hit too close to home. I had been practicing, but with Ronald, not Tom. Tom saw the shocked look on my face and laughed it off, saying he was just joking. But his words stayed with me. I couldn't shake off the feeling that he might know more than he was letting on. Little did I know that was just the tip of the iceberg. Tom's comment was a hint that he was more aware than I had realized. My perfect facade was starting to crack, and it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. In the days that followed, I tried to push those thoughts aside and focus on the renewed connection with Tom. We spent more time together, went on dates, and genuinely enjoyed each other's company. But there was always a nagging feeling in the back of my mind, a fear that the other shoe was about to drop. Tom had hired a private investigator to catch me. That was how he had found out I had been cheating. Let me explain. After that night, the next day went by pretty normally. I went to work, Tom went to work, and we came back home in the evening. We had dinner together, something we had promised each other to always do as a way to help our relationship. It felt like things were getting back on track. However, the following day was different. That was the day I got kicked out. I had gone to work, but Tom had the day off. He told me he decided to rest and would just stay home. I was fine with that. I was only supposed to be at work for a few hours, and I told him I would come back and spend more time with him instead of heading to Ronald's house like I usually did on days like that. When I came home, my bags were outside the house. I was shocked. I immediately pulled out my phone and started calling Tom. He picked up almost instantly. His voice was cold and calm as he told me he knew I had been cheating. He said he had hired a private investigator and he had evidence of me with Ronald. He said he never wanted to see me again. He had brought all my stuff outside so I wouldn't have to go through the trouble of packing, and he had changed the locks. He told me to just leave. I started crying on the phone, trying to explain to him that I had been so lonely that it had only happened for a while and that I was sorry. But Tom wouldn't listen. He cut me off and hung up. As I stood there, I realized how naive I had been. I had thought I was managing my double life perfectly, but Tom had known all along. The private investigator had likely followed me for weeks, gathering evidence while I went about my affair with Ronald completely unaware. I looked at my bags and felt a wave of regret wash over me. Everything I had taken for granted, everything I had jeopardized, was now in front of me in a heap of clothes and personal belongings. My marriage, my home, my sense of security, all gone because of my selfish actions. I didn't know where to go or what to do. I called a few friends, but no one answered. In desperation, I called Ronald, but he didn't pick up either. I was completely alone. Eventually, I gathered my bags and went to a nearby hotel. I had destroyed my marriage for a fleeting affair that hadn't meant as much as I thought it did. The happiness I had felt with Ronald was nothing compared to the stability and love I had with Tom. Over the next few days, I tried to contact Tom again, but he had blocked my number. I sent emails, but he didn't respond. I went to his office, but he refused to see me. The life I had known was over, and I had no one to blame but myself. I have had plenty of time to think about everything that has led to this point. I thought about the choices I had made and how they had hurt the person I loved most. The loneliness I had felt was no excuse for what I had done. I had been selfish and reckless, and now I was paying the price. I wish I had found the courage to talk to Tom sooner, to be honest about my feelings and work together to find a solution. Maybe things would have been different. Maybe we could have found a way to reconnect and bring back the passion in our marriage. But it's too late for maybes. The damage is done, and now I have to figure out where to go from here. I'm sorry if it seems like I was rambling. I'm sorry if it took me too long to explain everything. But I just want to know if there's any way possible for me to save my marriage. I know what I did was wrong. I should have cut things off right from the moment things started working out for me and my husband again. But I was just a little too scared, and I just didn't think about that much. Is there any way I can talk to my husband? Any advice would be greatly appreciated. I've seen Reddit give some really great advice, so I have no doubt that I might get something useful out of here. Update. Hey Reddit, things have been a whirlwind lately. I know I messed up, and I'm not trying to justify anything. The hate and judgment have been overwhelming, like I've committed some unforgivable crime. I get it, but can we tone it down a bit? I'm already going through a lot here. To address some questions I've been getting, no, I don't want a divorce. I want to fix things with my husband, even though it feels like an uphill battle right now. And yes, I'm still holed up in this hotel room. Family? Yeah, I've got them, but I haven't spilled the beans about what's going on. I'm just too embarrassed to face them at the moment, hence the hotel stay. But let's face it, I can't keep bleeding money on hotels forever, so I'll probably have to swallow my pride and head home in a week or so. Communication with my husband? Not great. We aren't exactly chatting these days. He's not keen on hearing my excuses. He just wants out. Looking back, I see I was searching for something in my marriage, something I thought was missing. Ronald showed me a glimpse of that, but it cost me dearly. I betrayed the person I once cherished more than anything, and it's eating me up inside. I'm wrestling with this urge to talk to him, to lay everything bare. It's like carrying a ton of bricks on my chest, this desperate need to make things right, salvage whatever's left between us. I messed up and it's tearing me apart. Guilt is suffocating, especially when I think of how I let fear cloud my judgment. I should have ended things when I saw a chance to mend, but I clung to something I knew was wrong. Now I just want an honest conversation with him, no excuses, just raw apology. I want him to see how much I regret my actions. But I'm terrified too. What if he shuts me out? What if he's moved on and thinks it's best to leave things be? Update. Hey Reddit, it's been a minute, hasn't it? About a month since my last update. The hate train got to me and I ended up deleting my Reddit account. But hey, I'm back because a lot has happened and I need an outlet to unload. So first things first, I'm back at my parents' place. Yeah, I know I mentioned that before and it happened sooner than I expected. I couldn't keep up with hotel expenses or I'd go broke. So back to the parental abode it was. It's cramped here because my brother's family also moved in due to some financial issues, but my parents knew I had nowhere else to go. Now about the divorce, it's happening. I tried reaching out to my in-laws for help, hoping they could talk some sense into my husband, but they declined. My parents did try, but my husband was adamant. He pointed out that if the roles were reversed, they'd probably advise him not to forgive me either. Harsh, but he wasn't wrong. I've accepted it's over. I wanted to fix things, but sometimes you just have to let go. I've taken responsibility. Told him I'll sign whatever papers he sends. No arguments. And then there's Ronald. After getting kicked out, I called him for a place to crash. No response. The next day, he suddenly decides to end things, citing our situation with my husband. Cold move, right? It left me shocked and angry. I thought he cared, but he bailed when things got real. Work has gotten awkward since then. I've tried avoiding him, but it's impossible. We're civil but distant. Coworkers have noticed, but no one's prying. The job itself is becoming a burden. The commute from my parents' place is insane, more than 5 hours round trip. I'm considering quitting, but I need something else lined up to avoid financial disaster. Life's a mess right now, but hey, at least the hate train is still chugging along, right? Thanks for the mixed bag of support and hate, Reddit. Update. Hey Reddit, it's been a while since I last posted. I apologize for the absence, but the hate became too overwhelming and I had to delete my account again for the sake of my mental health. It's been 2 months since my last update, and though I didn't initially plan to post again, I feel I owe it to the few supporters out there to share what has transpired and how things have ended. First off, I'm still at my old job. I received a few job offers, but they were all roughly the same pay as my current position. And despite the long commute, I genuinely enjoy working at the art gallery. It's a 5-hour round trip, which is exhausting, but the other jobs were mostly 9-to-5 jobs, which I wasn't ready to transition into just yet. I know I no longer have the luxury of relying on my husband's financial support, and I will have to adapt eventually, but for now, I'm holding on to this job that I love. Living at my parents' house has been tough. It's cramped, especially with my brother and his family also living here after losing their home. I think I've mentioned that before. My parents have been urging me to move out and find a roommate, but they understand that with my current salary, it's not possible yet. They're giving me some time to get back on my feet. Now for the update I know many of you have been waiting for. The divorce has been finalized. I know a lot of you felt I didn't deserve my husband, and I have to live with the consequences of my actions. The divorce process was straightforward since we had no kids and no debts to split. However, my state's laws regarding cheating are harsh. If a spouse is caught cheating, they lose the right to custody of any children automatically, and in theory, you could be arrested for it. Fortunately, we didn't have kids, so it was a clean break. I didn't get any of his properties or assets, and I wasn't surprised by that outcome. Since the divorce, life has been pretty mundane. I miss my husband, and I'm dealing with a lot of depression, but I'm trying to push through. The house is still tight, and the daily grind is exhausting, but I'm managing. The interactions with Ronald at work have been awkward, to say the least. I try to avoid him, but it's not always possible. I've realized that sharing my story on Reddit might have done more harm than good, given the immense hate I received. But I also found some support here, and for that, I'm grateful. This is going to be my last update. I'll probably delete this account and maybe start fresh with a new one because, despite everything, I do enjoy being part of this community. So goodbye, Reddit. Thanks to those who supported me and even to those who didn't. Your feedback made me reflect deeply on my actions. Take care.